On the regenerative journey, our goal is to nurture and facilitate the lives and journeys of all our followers, which is why we've teamed up with resource consulting service RCS, Australia's leading provider of education and advisory services in regenerative agriculture. RCS trains and consults across the ag sector, from individuals and families through to corporates and even government, empowering people to grow productive and profitable businesses in diverse and, importantly, healthy landscapes. They understand that the future of healthy families, resilient communities and regenerative farming lies in holistic education. Over the last 15 years, I've played an integral role in my own regenerative journey, and I have a lot to thank RCS for, and I'm one of 7,500 others who have attended their farming and grazing for profit course. I don't know where I'd actually be, and I certainly wouldn't be this far down my own regenerative journey if I hadn't completed a significant amount of training with the RCS team. I can't recommend more highly RCS to anyone looking to start their regenerative journey in a supportive and proven environment. Terry McCosker and your team, you absolutely rock. And we're also absolutely stoked to be collaborating with them now. For my listeners only, we're offering a 10% discount on all farming and grazing for profit schools and grazing clinics in Australia this year. If you add this to the early bird rate of a 7-day school, you could get a whopping $1,000 off the standard price. Simply add the code CharlieRCS, that's CharlieRCS, that's one word, at the checkout to get your concession. How awesome is that? Now head to the show notes to find out more.
As soon as you start thinking about the earth as your mother, if you respect your mother, you will not hurt her. You will do anything you can for her comfort and for her recognition. I'd put that through the mother. We come through the mother's heartbeat.
That was Bruce Pascoe, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. From wherever we are, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognising their continuing connection to this land, its waterways, the stars in the skies since time immemorial. We pay our respects to the elders, knowledge holders, and to all the generations of First Nations peoples who have nurtured their unceded sovereign lands for over 80,000 years and continue to do so today.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, an 8th generational Australian regenerative farmer. And in this podcast series, I'll be diving deep and exploring my guests' unique perspectives on the world so you can apply their experience and knowledge to cultivate your own transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with your host Charlie Arnott.
G'day and welcome back to The Regenerative Journey, and we are looking at, or you're about to listen to, the last episode of Season 5 in The Regenerative Journey, and I've absolutely loved that Season 5. I've had a really good mix of people. I have been pushing the boundaries of time for Reese to get edited. This one in particular, because it's a day or two after I've interviewed Bruce Pascoe, who is our guest on this last episode for Season 5, and it's coming out only in a few days' time, 5 days' time. So Reese has done very well to keep up. Not keep up, actually, the other way around, to just push on. And we're looking forward to a break. For those of you who are Patreon members, excuse me, I'm just going to have a cough here. excuse me. It's truth. For those who are Patreon members, we're going to, how do you say it? Spatter, something. We're going to intersperse the Q&A sessions that we've been doing with our guests throughout the season. Between seasons, so you'll actually have something to listen to between seasons, and I trust that's of some value. Those are not as long as the interviews themselves by any means, but there's certainly a continuation, and I've got a pretty standard set of questions I ask. And you know what you are, what questions they are if you're a Patreon members. I think you should anyway. So we're going to do that between seasons, which is awesome. Back to the current state of play. Look, politics, the election has been won. Excuse me. Results announced, except for, and I could be wrong, I just had a bit of a look DuckDuckGo. If anyone wants an alternative to the other normal search engine, take a look at DuckDuckGo. Anyway, there's not a plug for them. I'm not getting paid for that. Just find it pretty good. I could not find a definite result for David Pocock, who's going for the Senate in the ACT. I interviewed Dave here. Gee whiz, it was about, it'd be over 12 months ago now. Have to be over 12 months ago. Might have been season 3 or maybe even season 2. Anyway, lovely fellow, had a really good yarn here at Hannah Minogue, just completed with Emma. His wife, a 2-day introduction to biodynamics workshop. And it was, so he had a good yarn, and he is running for the Senate there. And I think he's going to get up. All the reports I've read and things I've been following on his site, suggesting it's going to be a close call. It may be called within days, because it's now 10 days. I think it's 10 days after the election. Taking some time, but I trust that Dave will get in there and do his bit as he said he would, and I believe he will. So all power to Dave there. It's pretty cold here in Boorowa. We are we've hit winter. It was sort of, it was autumny for most of autumn, as you'd expect. But it's funny how, I don't know, in Australia we have, Indigenous people say, it could be 16 seasons. It's certainly not a cut and dry 4 seasons like, I guess traditionally the Northern Hemisphere. I'm not sure because there's less sort of land mass in the southern. I think it's fair to say there's less land mass generally in the southern hemisphere than there is in the northern, whether that has an influence on it. But nonetheless, we don't have 4 straight seasons here, Boorowa. We're supposed to be a Mediterranean climate traditionally, but I don't know if that's kind of you can really pigeonhole us that much either. But my point is that autumn is kind of, it's gone. It's gone officially of today. And it's really is winter's gone. Look, I'm just going to make sure you understand that I'm here. But normal for Boorowa, cold, wet, pretty cold. So anyway, nonetheless, that's what we got. What else can I bang on about before I get on to Bruce, which was such a wonderful interview the other day, I have to say, in front of a live audience. RCS Convergence, of course, on the 16th and 17th of July, and I'll be there and I'll be interviewing a number of people at the conference. Well, maybe not at the conference, maybe after or even before. I've just got to work it out because there's some wonderful, it's a collection of some amazing speakers. Some will be virtual, and most I think will be in person now that restrictions have eased somewhat. So pretty excited about that. The guys at RCS have been very generous in, dare I say, allowing access to some of those people, but we'll work on that. But that's going to be really exciting too, and that's going to sort of start building a backlog. That's not probably the word to use, is it? A reservoir? No, a collection. That's a better word. A collection of interviews for season 6, which we have not announced or thought of a release date yet, a kickoff date, launch. But nonetheless, there'll be plenty to do, and we're doing a road trip in a caravan with the family up into Queensland in a few weeks' time for workshops up there, 3 workshops, which I'm sure you've heard about. I trust you have if you've been listening to any of these other interviews for season 5. We'll be up at Claremont on the Monday. Let me just work it out. Monday and Tuesday? Let's work backwards. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Yeah, it's the 20th and 21st of June at Claremont. It's just north of Claremont, actually. And then on the on the Saturday, Sunday, which would be, bugger it up, 25th, 26th of June, we're going to be at Billawheeler. And then on the 29th, 30th of June, we'll be at the Sunshine Coast there. So get your tickets ASAP. And if you do want to grab a ticket, you'll get a almanac from Phoebe from Alchemilla, who's a fantastic biodynamic flower farm down in Victoria, and I'm dying to get down there because I've just seen her stuff. Go and follow her on Instagram and so on, and it's just amazing. There's the abundance and the amount of just the colour and the health and beauty of those flowers is incredible. So if you're in Victoria and you want a bunch of flowers, get onto her and see how that easy you can do that. It's just amazing. Anyway, so she has put together over the last few years an almanac, and we've got the 2022 almanac to give to any ticket buyer from now on for our workshops up there in Queensland. And it's got cosmic cycles, lunar cycles. It's got spots that you can record your gardening and farming sort of activities. Lots of guides and charts and wonderful, step-by-step or step you through the process of understanding all of that cool lunar and cosmic cycles and how that can help you with your plantings and your activities in the garden and the farm. So that's a recommended retail price of $60, and you get it for nothing. And we are so grateful for Phoebe's generous support of our workshops, and we just love what she's doing down there in Victoria. What else have I got to bang on about? That's probably about it. I think I've banged on enough. How long's that? Gee whiz, 8 minutes. Get on to Bruce Pascoe. Caught up with Bruce live. Ryan Watson, the Fairlight Butcher, there in Sydney, in Fairlight, believe it or not. He put together an event the other night with Bruce, and Bruce very kindly flew up from Victoria and spoke with the kids there at one of the schools, one of the public schools that Ryan organised, and then he spoke with us in the evening at the Manly Life Church. Tim there, awesome guy, just let us use the church hall again. I don't know, you better listen to the interview, because I'm not going to do half as good a job as explaining what he said, and it's not the point. It's just I love the way Bruce just articulates and his the way he can kind of give practical and talks about practical steps towards he calls it, and I understand now why, conciliation, not reconciliation. I think it's a really important point. As he said, reconciliation is kind of what you do after both parties have sinned. You know, there's both reconcile because there needs to be some changes and acknowledgement that both sides have sinned. And as you know, I tend to agree. You know, in this whole Indigenous debate, or whatever we want to sort of describe it, I don't know. They really sinned. You know, as he said, they've done bad things, but we all can, or we all have, and we all will. We're human. But his point is, it's a conciliation, which puts the emphasis, somewhat back onto us. Us white, white Aussie Anglos, to make the effort. And we should, and we will. So conciliation is the word, not reconciliation, I think. I mean, I'm not trying to offend anyone there. I trust I'm not offending anyone. However, Bruce sets it out pretty plainly, as he did the whole interview. It was engaging. We had a room full of people who I assume probably had sore bums, but they seemed to love it. And just really appreciate Ryan for getting that organised, Tim for the church, and Uncle Bruce Pascoe for giving us his time, flying all the way from Victoria just for the day, and he flew back the next day. And his wealth of wisdom, it was just awesome. So I hope you enjoy this first live recording I've done, and it was actually worked really well. It was really interactive and fun. And the chat I had with Uncle Bruce, I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I just wanted to say a big shout out to my team here at the Regenerative Journey. This is, as I said earlier, this is the last episode for season 5. It's been a cracker. Really enjoyed it, and just big, enormous, wonderfully large shout outs to Reece Edward Jones for his amazing his patience and the way just things just appear and happen and get things done. The way he edits our interviews, as you know, we don't really edit them at all from go to woe, unless I go and drain the spuds for a minute and there's just a hollow silence, or children turn up and trash the place, which has happened before. So Reece is amazing the way he can do that. Fiona Turney, who has been with me for a few years now, and she's just awesome, and she keeps me on track, keeps things rolling along in the background, and has been an absolute integral part of the team. And so Fiona, thank you very much. Angelica, my wife, and my family, Lordy and Lilla and Venus and Persia, and everyone who supports what we do. it's just an awesome thing. RCS, big thank you to them for their sponsorship during this season 5. I do that not just because it's a commercial deal or anything. It's because they've had such an interesting, not interesting, that's the wrong word, such an integral part to play in my own regenerative journey. And they're an awesome organisation, awesome mob for training, and the conference that's coming up in the middle of July is just a really good. Just highlights the depth and breadth of their contacts and their influence and their intention to transform people's lives, their businesses, their lives, their families, and their landscape. So big thank you to them. Who else? I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. I probably have. All my team here at Hannah Minnow as well. Jim and Brock and Tessa and Jane and Graham, and we're just Angelica and I are eternally grateful for the effort and the time that they put into. We're away a lot, and the way the farm ticks over, and more than ticks over. That feeling of abundance and life, vitality. It's fantastic. So thank you guys for that as well. Who have I got? Fiona and Reese and Angelica, the family. All my guests for just the time they spend. Hopefully it's not too tedious sitting with me having a yarn for an hour and a half or so. Really appreciate the time they've put in. We've got lots of guests coming up for season 6. And you, the listener, who you don't have to listen. There's so many podcasts out there, really good ones. Even in the regenerative ag space, there's a plethora of really good ones out there too. So the fact that you're listening to this and you may have listened to other episodes blows my socks off, and I'm just really, really pleased that how much support we get and how many lovely comments we get as well. We had comments about maybe I should talk less in interviews, and I take that on board 100%. I actually don't know if I talk a hell of a lot. If you did the percentages on it, I don't know if it'd be, don't know what it'd be. However, I actually get many, many, many more comments saying we just love the style, the conversation of it all, that they feel like they're sort of eavesdropping, on a yarn, with a cup of tea around a kitchen table, which is what we're trying to do. So, don't think I'm going to reduce, the amount of time I spend. And it depends on the guest too. I mean, for those who don't interview people, it's really how you run it. How the interview's going, and whether you feel you need to sort of help the guest along with a bit of chit chat, or they feel you understand the rapport that you have, or some want to chat, some want to have a conversation, like Rachel Ward trying to turn it right round on me. That's a classic, but a good example, So there's no formula to it. That's that one. And Patreon members, you're the best. You're awesome. You support me every week. Every month, and I couldn't do it without you, to be honest. The fact that you spend your $10 or so a month, you get those extra bits, the transcripts, the weekly videos, the monthly webinars. You'll be getting the Q&A soon too, as well, between seasons. Just awesome, and you don't have to do it, and you do. So, all power to you, and much appreciated. And we're live. We're on. Bruce Pascoe. Welcome to the Regenerative Journey, and welcome to Tim, I've forgotten the name of the church hall.
Manly Life Church.
Which one? Manly Life Church. It was on the outside. Welcome to Manly Life Church Hall. We did a gig here last year, or you didn't, I did with Charlie Massey, and it was wonderful, and it's lovely to be back. We couldn't even work out. Anyone remember, was it 2021 or 2020 we did that gig? Anyone remember? Jason Little, you remember? Was it? Yeah, it was 2 years ago. Awesome. Okay, it doesn't matter. But we're back, and it's a lovely thing. Bruce, I'm going to start. Traditionally, I start with, I'm sure you know because you've listened to all my podcasts, that I easily start and I interview my guests in their happy place. So that's their garden, their home if they haven't got a garden, or their farm or their veranda or something. But we're not at Malakuta. We're a long way from that. So I'm just going to give you a bit of thinking time, and I want to read one of the most beautiful quotes that I captured probably a year or two ago on a webinar you did with Murray Pryor, and his organisation. He sort of set that up, and I can't remember who else was on it, but I was just blown away with this. And I listened to it. I was in the car. I was on a webinar recording, and this passage just blew my socks off. And you said it, and I actually don't know.
You've got them back on.
I know they're back on now. They're a bit smelly. But what I thought is, how can someone just come up with these words? But I guess you are a writer, so it's not surprising. And this is what you said. I had to go back and play the recording, and I had to write it down. We want those good Australians to say, we've talked enough about reconciliation. We're not going to bring in the army again. We're going to bring in the school teacher and the nurse and the farmer, and as many of those will be black as we can make it. This is our vision for our country, our ambition for our country, And at a time somewhere in the future, we'll come to an agreement with each other about the past and the present and the future. And during that process, we will make a nation. And I tell you what, that was the most beautiful thing I think I've ever read. It was in the context, it was just a wonderful thing. And I wanted to start with that because for me, that just gives me goosebumps. And I've talked enough now. Bruce, welcome to Regenerative Journey. What does it feel like to be Bruce Pascoe sitting in a church hall in Fairlight, in Manly, miles from home, with a primarily white Anglo-Australian kind of audience?
It feels cold, which is why I've got my coat on, for which I apologise, but I froze a bit today. Look, I feel very strongly that this country has a really... we're on the brink of having a different future than we might have had. When you look at our defence partner, America, and how they routinely kill children over there, and then their ex-president says the only way to stop a bad man with a gun is to, have him shot by a good man with a gun, but not explaining how you choose between the good and the bad, or even identify that person. This is the future that I don't want for this country. My family is, 80% white, so I cannot act as if the rest of the country doesn't matter, and nor can I act as if Aboriginal ancestry doesn't matter either. It's a difficult line to walk, but I want a future for this country that is not American. First Nation Americans were bought off with casinos. The health of those people is appalling, as is the health of Australian Aboriginal people, but it might be better. And to want better is not a left-wing sentiment, it's human decency. And that's what I want for this country. I'd like to think that our better angels will have more influence in the future. And I was stunned last weekend to hear the Prime Minister in his first words to the nation say that we are going to adopt the letter to the heart in full. The Uluru Statement. I was shocked. I wasn't expecting it, and then Penny Wong repeated it. It seems sincere, and it seems like those people are determined to deliver it. That'll change our nation forever, because the Uluru Statement is such a gently worded document. As a writer, I've always been jealous of it, and I've often wondered who wrote it, because I felt convinced that it was an individual, because committees don't write like that. It's beautifully worded. It is, in the future, going to be the thing that we read out when we host the Olympic Games, when we host the Commonwealth Games. It is such a transfixing document because it is from the heart. I feel very confident that we're going to have a better future, and we can do it together, and we can do it with pride. Everyone can take pride in it, and everyone can feel uplifted by it. It's not going to be without its bruises and without its arguments. When you come from so far back, that journey is hard on the feet and the soul. It's not going to be without pain. We can't expect it to. But I can see the possibility of it. I certainly don't want a nation that is so divided psychologically that we accept the fact that children get shot in their classroom.
Just back to the new government, because I was interested to see that also, and the first press conference, the Indigenous flag and the Torres Strait Islanders flag was up. I mean, how can we? So that's a bold upfront statement, which is on their outset wonderful. How can we keep them accountable for this? What looks like a sincere kind of a effort?
Well, we held the other mob accountable by voting, and so the vote is a very treasured item, and we should insist on maintaining the vote for everybody in the country, not just some, because it makes everyone think about politics, whether they want to or not, and not just some people. So I think the vote's very important, but it's also action. It's not really about, words are good, but action is huge. And what has always dismayed me is that people talk floridly about relationships with Aboriginal people, but nothing much is delivered. We've had recent experience of working with non-Aboriginal people where the big mission was the promotion and ambition of the non-Aboriginal person and using black people to get there, being Don Quixote's horse. And we don't want that anymore. We're not going to accept that as the process. But there are so many good Australians. I meet them everywhere with good hearts, sometimes a bit of lacking in knowledge, but I think there's enough of those people to understand that if you're going to eat our food, you're going to have to swallow our history in this country. Australia will have to accept the fact there was a war in this country. Aboriginal people lost the war and lost the land as a process, and this is one of the only wars ever fought in the world where no settlement has taken place afterwards. And it amazes New Zealanders, for instance, when they come here, who seem sorely embarrassed by the ignorance shown by Australians about Aboriginal people and Aboriginal land and Aboriginal history. We can't separate Aboriginal history from Australian history. They are one. And I read in the paper today from one of the new members of Parliament saying that it shouldn't surprise people that all Australians can take pride not just in 230 years, but 120,000 years. Why wouldn't you want to? Why wouldn't you want to associate with a society as successful as that? I think the future is bright.
We might leave it there, Bruce.
Yeah, let's go home.
That's awesome. Bruce, I want to take you back to your life as a young man or a young boy. as far back as you want to go, because this is about your regenerative journey, and it's not farming is something that you, I don't know about interested in. You may have been interested for some time, but it gets took up later on in life. But this is about not regenerative farming necessarily, though that is part of your journey. It's about, I guess, a journey of regeneration, mentally, physically, culturally. So how far back do you want to go, Bruce? What do you come from? Where? The womb?
Oh, King on.
King on?
Yeah.
What age?
I'd love the womb at the moment. It'd be lovely and warm. But yeah, King Island. I became really conscious of country on King Island.
What age were you then?
7, 8, 9. When I was on the island. My father was a really good man, but he was a bit erratic. Really solid family man, but a wanderer. And he left a really good job and took us to King Island. We had cousins on the island, but he worked in the mine down there until the mine closed, and he worked in the hardware shop until that closed, and then he worked on cray boats, and then my mother got really sick and we left the island and came back to Victoria so she could be looked after. But the island was 15 miles long by 4 wide, and a kid could leave home and walk across it and come back in time for lunch, or stay over there and fish and cook fish on the beach. So for me, I learnt so much about animals and about being self-reliant. And so my father couldn't keep us at school, so he told my sister and I that we would have to get a scholarship if we wanted to go to university. And thanks to Bob Menzies, Liberal Prime Minister at the time, who offered scholarships to working class kids. Who you wouldn't see that today, but that's what it was like in those days, that Menzies wanted working class kids at university. I got one of those scholarships. You had to be a school teacher. I love teaching. I love kids. We were at Mossman School earlier today, and fabulous bunch of kids asking really interesting questions and giving really interesting answers. The future's bright while you've got kids who think. And so that was a joy for me to be involved with kids for so long. What was the question again?
There wasn't. It was as vague as ever, Bruce. Not you.
I did become a farmer. When I got a promotion to Malakuta School, and that's because no one else wanted it. And they were delighted to have someone apply. And
what age?
That's 1972.
Yeah.
And I loved that school. I loved the town. I loved the country. And I bought an old farm there, and it had been hammered. And so I set about restoring, some of the soil health and water quality and things like that. But I couldn't afford what I was doing, so I sold that eventually. But now I'm back on a farm since 4 years ago, and doing the same thing. I was just saying before that since we got rid of the cattle and allowed grass to grow, and more importantly, allow grass to seed, our dams have never emptied. Before that, they looked ragged, distraught-looking beasts. But now that the water has slowed down, water seeps into those dams every day of the year. It's a great transformation, and our soil health has skyrocketed. The numbers of insects on the property has increased as well. We've stopped using poison. It's really simple. One of the biggest expenses in farming is poisons and fertilisers. And sometimes it's hard to distinguish one from the other. And, you stop doing that, and even though you may not get the bounce in the pasture that superphosphate will still give you, those bright green pastures you see are made from superphosphate. But superphosphate's running out because, 15 million years of bird shit can be consumed by one country in 70 years. That bounce is not going to be there all the time. So you have to, as a farmer, you now have to create soil. You have to be super conscious of it. And you are responsible for it, and not a bag that you pay $120 for. Really important that we learn the new economy of farming, which is to reduce chemical expenses and start growing perennial grains and tubers. That's what we're doing on the farm at Yumbera. All our plants are perennial. So we can harvest them, but they remain in the ground. It makes an incredible difference. And, that's how you build soil.
Do you, you've just taken about, 40 years or 30 years of your life out of there, Bruce, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Well, I better do that. That's better. 30, 40 years have just disappeared. We'll get back. However, while we're on the farm, do you, I'm just curious, you've got good perennial species there, native species, no doubt. Do you actively manage or by removing or focusing on the introduced species like, I don't know what you'd have down there?
We've got
non-natives?
Kaikuyu, fleabane, inkweed, and now Madagascan fireweed, which we got from the Bega Valley. The previous farmer got it in a roll of hay, and it just took off, and it's a really nasty weed, and we put a lot of work into that. We hand pull it. But it was interesting. We were going pretty well with our crops, and then the fire came through 2019, 2020, and the farm burnt from fence to fence. Didn't lose the house, thanks to some good luck and good neighbours. And we were a bit devastated because we were grassless for 3 weeks on the property, and then it rained, and we got Microlenus diploides became the dominant grass species. Pardon me. And then we were able to turn that into flower. We didn't have a lot of it, but we had enough to prove that we could manage our farm with fire, as long as we didn't overuse fire or underuse fire. As long as we worked out the old Aboriginal system, then we could always have grass. And that's what it's like. We had 4 weeks ago, we burnt about 20 acres, and the previous year we burnt about 7. That 7 acres was the best grass on our property this year, and it was all kangaroo grass and spear grass. But interestingly, it was also full of orchids. We'd never seen orchids on the farm before, but because we've stopped using super and poisons, the orchids are coming up, and they're edible. Interesting story, Charlie. Thank you for asking.
He doesn't want to yarn. I was going, I've got enough questions for him.
We will. There's an orchid that used to be the dominant plant in Melbourne. The dominant plant in Melbourne. It was an orchid called Diurus fragrantissima. It's delicious to eat, and it was everywhere in Melbourne. It was the new arrivals in 1836 called it snow in the paddocks because that white flower was just everywhere. There are now 12 individual orchids left because of sheep and cattle, soil compaction. It's virtually gone. And you must never repeat this.
This won't go anywhere, don't worry.
Hand on the heart, you're not going to repeat this. We approached a person involved in the restoration of the orchid, and she said, "What do you want to do with it?" And we said, "We want to eat it," which is, to a botanist, is horrible. You're not supposed to eat plants.
Especially there's only like 12 left.
Yeah.
Can I have 3?
Yeah. No, we said no. We don't really want to eat those ones.
Yeah.
We want to make it as prolific as it was before, because we didn't make it rare. Our eating it didn't make it rare, because we were managing it. We were nurturing that plant, and. You know, I would just like to restore this plant as a way of Australia learning to fall in love with each other again, because one of the lovely stories about that orchid was that young lovers who want to impress each other were gathering armfuls of this flower and giving it to their loved one. Now, it doesn't say in the report whether it was men or women who were doing the giving or doing the accepting. Let's hope it was mutual. And what a lovely thing it was to give white flowers to your loved one. What a romantic gesture. We could do it again, and we could still eat the bloody things.
So the lily that's on, the orchid that came up after the burn, was that particular one? Was it?
No, we had Diurus, whatever it is, a yellow flowering one. It's the sister to that white orchid. But we've got the facilities on the farm now to grow, and we've got the Aboriginal people there with the expertise to grow and nurture and pot and sell. It's all there. So my cousin Dave Wandon, who is the great-grandson of William Barrack, and the Victorian government just bought back one of William Barrack's paintings. You might have seen it on the news. And what I want to do from Yuin people, I want to make a gift of that orchid back to my cousin, because it's a gesture on our part. We are giving you something. We want you to have this. We're not selling it. We're giving it away because we can do it. Dave could do it himself, but at the moment he doesn't have the facility. So we could do it, and we want to rush into it and give it away so he can keep it. But I also see this as a real act of conciliation between white and black, that not only do we give it to Dave, we give it to everybody. And this can make a real statement that white and black can work together to bring this plant back, just as we work hard to bring birds back and mice and bilbies and things like that we've destroyed, mainly because of sheep. We can bring it back, and we can do this conciliation between us. Instead of talking, I don't believe in reconciliation, because reconciliation means that both sides have sinned. And I don't believe that Aboriginal people did. We're capable of sinning, I see it quite often. But in the first instance, it wasn't our fault. So we don't want to reconcile, we want to conciliate between two groups. And I think we can do it through plants, and we can do it through white flowering plants that are called fragrantissima because they smell so sweet.
That was a question you answered, Bruce. Thank you. It was kind of like, 'cause I noticed you used the word conciliation, not reconciliation. So thank you for defining that. And that's, I don't think you can argue with that. That's, I guess that's the language that governments, councils, people, we've got to start using that sort of language, because it's acknowledging the history, not just two people's doing wrong and then trying to make it right. But what I love about your attitude, Bruce, is that, as is in that quote there that I read it earlier, is there's so much that, Indigenous people can be angry about, absolutely. But your attitude is one of conciliation and just getting on and doing it. And your farm is a great example of that. When you had those fires, I mean, you'd written Dark Humour back in 2014, and we'll get back to that. But was it the things like those fires and the microlina coming back, and then the orchids? I mean, that must have been fascinating that you'd read so much about this, the biology and the botany, and then you were actually experiencing it kind of accidentally. Was that kind of exciting?
It was incredibly exciting, and because all the people who work on the farm are mostly Yuin, but also some other clans as well. We witnessed it together, and we had great days on our hands and knees oohing and ahhing over new plants. And it was like a resurrection, and it was really thrilling to be there with the brothers and sisters while that was happening. They really were thrilling days. But those young people, they saved me because the fires were really horrible, as you can imagine. And I didn't, because of my family, I'm a bit of a stoic, and I think I've always thought that I was bulletproof psychologically because of what my parents went through. They had prepared me for just about anything. But after the fires, I realised that I wasn't as strong as I thought. But those young kids, anyone under 60 is a kid to me, but those young people, with their enthusiasm, and when I was struggling to get the energy, they'd say, "Come on, Unc, we've got to get that shed up. Look at that bloody roof, we've got to fix it." And they nagged me into action, and I'll never forget it. I interviewed Arnott Rubinstein a few weeks ago, and that episode came out a few weeks ago, and he talks about rites of passage, and what struck me just then was do you consider yourself an elder? Like, as in, did you go through a rite of passage, whether it was kind of formal or otherwise, where you took over different roles within your community, your farm? It sounds like those, the young bucks were running around G'ing you up, but no doubt you've G'd them up and you are a mentor to them. Is there, even in Indigenous culture, in Australian Indigenous culture, is there a rite of passage for, certainly I understand there is from a child to a youth or an adult. Is there one from kind of that adult to an elder where you don't go down the line, you actually sort of, you just change your role in the community? Is that sort of something that you've experienced or know of? Well, it's something that Australia is going to need to know about contemporary Aboriginal society. But I'm not an elder, I'm just older, and I'm much older. We do law. People in Australia need to know that South Coast, New South Wales, East Coast, Victorian people, we do law. I know Paul Gordon in Western New South Wales does law, takes kids through all the time. But that doesn't consecrate you as an elder. It just teaches you good manners about country, how to treat country, how to treat people. So it's, there's no chief, there's no leader. There is a circle of people who work together. And that's what it was always like. And that's what we try to replicate, not just on the farm with the farming techniques, using the cool burns to promote growth, not using poisons. That's our old traditional way of looking after country. But we do it socially and psychologically as well, and that helps people. I'm as much led by those young people on the farm as they're led by me. Make no mistake, because a lot of those fellas have grown up at their grandfather and grandmother's knee, learning story. I didn't get that in my early days. When my uncle started talking to me about culture, there was no one else in the family that I could ask about it because it was a closed shop. That family had closed the book on that side of life, particularly one side of the family, and for very good reason, because in the state they lived in, if you were Aboriginal, you got shot. It was a really wise decision not to get shot. And, it's not real denial, is it? It's looking after your kids so that they can grow up. That's a huge compulsion in the human spirit to look after your children. And so I don't blame that family. But now my son goes through law and my grandson has started. And my granddaughters too, although I won't have anything to do with that, they too have begun a journey. Australia needs to know that. They don't need to know much about it. You don't want to be a sticky beak. All you need to know is that the law continues in this country. It's not an aphorism. It's not something we say to be impressive, because there's nothing much impressive about it apart from good manners.
When did your uncle started talking about that? Did he have to do that kind of behind closed doors? Why did he start talking to you about it? He must have had an impulse that was maybe important for you to understand?
He was a ratbag, and my family were deeply Christian, and he was a drinker and a gambler, and a swearer, and a truck driver. And I found the latter the most impressive because I loved vehicles. And so he taught me to drive the truck. And it was in the truck that he started talking to me about family. And the rest of the family were really suspicious of him because he was a braggart. He was a real pain in the neck a lot of the time. But in the truck he would say, now we're driving to Lakes Entrance with a load of potatoes, and we had to pick up fish and bring them back. And he said, well, when we get near Lakes Entrance, we're going to start picking up Aboriginal people, and some of them will be your family. And I had no idea. And so he introduced me to 3 fellas on a tray boat at Lakes Entrance, and he said, these are your family too. From a different state. And it was terribly confusing, and because there's no one else to talk to about, it took a long time to get anywhere with that. But he was a genuine man, and he had photographs all through the house of various people. I was lucky enough to get a couple of them, but I missed a lot because when he died, the family, split up all the stuff in the house, which wasn't much, but all the books and photos were chucked down the tip. And they said, Bruce, this is yours, from Uncle Alf. And it was a bloody pot plant, like everyone else got dresses and, dining tables, and I got a pot plant.
Might have been a very rare orchid in that pot plant. I hope you didn't throw it out. What was it like, though, Bruce, when I guess, was there a time when curiosity got the better of you and you kind of started investigating yourself, gone beyond sort of being told who was family, and was there a time when you went, I'm actually going to ask more questions or actively seek out? And when you did, what was that interface like? What was that cultural kind of... Was it a hurdle for you or them?
Yeah, my daughter was 5. We were on the farm at Maramingo and going through the family album, and she just started pointing at people, so who's that, who's that, who's that? And I didn't know, and I couldn't tell her. So that's when I started. And then years after that, my cousins and I started exchanging photographs and stories and documents, and so we were able to start building up a bit of a family picture that way. And it was difficult, it was awkward and embarrassing, but what happened to me is I was living in the country. Most of my cousins weren't. So I was able to go to older Aboriginal people in the community, and they were astounded at my ignorance and treated me like a fool. They treated me like the fool that I was, not unkindly, but they weren't going to tell me anything. And you know, they said, look, we can't tell you about that until you acknowledge the history, you know, because they'd say things to me like, you know, when great-grandfather was killed in the war, and I was educated in Australia, so I was always taught there was no war on this soil. And they said, until you understand that there was a war, we can't talk to you. And so I went to the library and checked up on them and found that it was clearly demonstrated that there'd been a war in Australia, but that no Australian school child ever learnt about it.
Well, you certainly, just jumping over to Dark Emu, that was, I mean, I don't know, in the world of regenerative farming or kind of the circles of farming that we're in, you know, there's a handful of books, and Dark Emu is certainly in there as kind of the watershed moments for farming, and it stands out because it's of Indigenous sort of content. Why did that become an interest to you, the farming side of it? Because I guess you could have gone into all sorts of parts of the culture. Why the farming or the food?
Well, I'd written a couple of other history books before that. I'm a fiction writer, really, that's my trade. But I started writing history because I couldn't find my family story in any Australian history book. Even Henry Reynolds, God bless him, wasn't writing the kind of history that I was looking to read. So I wrote the history of Cape Otway, where I was living at the time, because everyone thinks that Latrobe was such a wonderful man, such a kind man, but he was actually involved in one of those massacres down there that took the lives of so many people. And I then started investigating more and more of my own family's history, and I wrote a book called Convincing Ground about about the war. It's basically a textbook on the war in Australia, of how the state sanctioned killing of Aboriginal people and dispossession. Isn't this a real cheer up? Would you like me to tell you a few jokes?
No, we need
to about Richmond because I'm so badly burnt from last week when Sydney beat them that I haven't recovered.
No, we need to hear it, Bruce.
Yeah. Convincing Ground was about the war, but while I was researching that, I was digging up all this material about Aboriginal people growing food, building dams, building houses, building roads, and I thought, I was shocked because I thought this, I was already at university or had been at university, so whatever it is, 12 years of education or something, not a word. And, I was reading some documents and thinking, well, how come no curriculum has ever included this stuff? When Charles Sturt was saved by 300 Aboriginal people who were growing grain in the very centre of Australia, which is now called Sturt's Stony Desert. For regenerative farmers, that's a really important thing to know. How come Australian school children didn't know it? How come Australian school children didn't know that Sir Thomas Mitchell rode through grain that was higher than his horse's saddle? The horse had to keep its head up so it could see where it was going, riding through what we now call Mitchell grass, which we managed to process on the farm last week to produce a grain that will make sesame seed look like chaff. It's a great grain and very easy to process now that we've got the right technique. How come that passage in Sir Thomas Mitchell's journey didn't become a centrepiece of Australian history? And why did it become Mitchell grass and not its original name? And how come it has now been destroyed? And that's where we grow cotton in Australia today, that thirsty plant which requires the soil to be ploughed, and then we throw up our hands in disbelief when that soil blows away and goes to New Zealand. We don't need to give New Zealand anything. We could recycle some of their prime ministers and that'd help.
Why? Well, you asked the question, why not? Why was that removed from circulation in schools, and when?
Charlie.
I know, but for those who haven't read Dark Emu, I think it just needs to be said.
Look, I'm trying to lighten the mood.
No, everyone knew they were going to cop it today.
I don't know. Imagine you're
you do.
You're the head of education in Australia at the Commonwealth level or the state level or something like that, and because you're a history teacher, you've read Sir Thomas Mitchell's diary, the journal, and you read that, riding through 9 miles of grass higher than the horse's saddle. And you decide then not to include that in the Australian curriculum. What's going on in your mind? Why did you make that decision? It is a great question. It's the question I ask myself all the time. Why make a deliberate decision to exclude that from Australian education? And all the other ministers of education, all the other school teachers, all the other politicians since have agreed to exclude it, so that when Dark Emu becomes the young Dark Emu and goes into schools, people throw up their hands as if it's child molestation, to tell the truth.
It wasn't just eliminated from school curriculum. From what I understand, reports that went back to England centuries ago was all about alleviating guilt, wasn't it?
Well, some people did send those stories back to England, but in the case of Lieutenant Grey, some of the things that he wrote about the yam fields in Western Australia were eliminated from the report that went back to the Parliament. So there were people consciously pruning the information that was going back to England, because in those days all the large landowners were also the magistrates. They were also the people delivering land, selling land to other people. So there's a high level of motivation to hide that information. But how it could happen for 230 years without some kind of public debate is amazing. And so when the new Prime Minister says we will deliver the Uluru Statement in full, I cried.
What will that mean? What will they be delivering? What changes will we see, or what implications will that have?
They could deliver bullshit in a very pretty package, or the government could ask Aboriginal people what each community wants. Instead of sending in the army to address child mortality and education and poor general health, instead of sending in the army, Send in the school teacher, send in the doctor, like, you read before, and do something humane. Don't do something inhumane. And this is a good place to say that.
Looking for more information to assist your regenerative journey? Come join Charlie and his guests around the kitchen table, an online community of supporters with exclusive access to the Regenerative Journey interview transcripts, live online Q&A sessions, a chance to engage with other like-minded people and more. Go to www.charliearnott.com.au/the kitchen table. And if you're not totally satisfied with the value of your membership and wish to cancel it within the first 2 months, we will give you a full 100% refund, no questions asked. Now let's get back to this week's episode.
I'm not out of questions, but is there any questions from the crowd? Is anyone bursting to get something out on the record? Come on. Yes, sir. Can we do a roving? Ryan?
Loud voices.
Yes, loud voices. You can use your outside voice.
Yeah. Hi Bruce, hi Charlie. Thanks for coming on tonight. It's fantastic to see you both. And thanks to Fairlight Butcher and Arnott plans for the butcher. Just a quick question. Bruce, have you ever been approached by any councils for your expertise in land management, soils, etc.? How to do things better, possibly, more effectively?
Can I just repeat that just for the sake of this? So, question was, has Bruce been approached by councils to engage to help with land management and landscape issues?
Absolutely.
Yep, cool. Next question.
Yeah, obviously to have those discussions is really important, but at this stage, no. And I say that with enormous sadness. I'll tell you what, with the view to increase the knowledge of Aboriginal occupation of the land around Malakuta, I was given a map by one of the brothers from Gunai country, Russell Mullet, who gave me a map of Malakuta, and all the language on it is Aboriginal. Mm-hmm. Every headland, every waterway, every beach, everything named it with Aboriginal names. I framed it and I offered it to the Shire Council to go into the information centre, because I was sick and tired of having people come up to me and say, "What are you whinging about?" There were no Aboriginal people in Malakuta. And here is this map with all Aboriginal names on it. And I thought, I don't need to argue with people, I just need to show them this map. And the Shire Council, East Gippsland Shire Council, if you have to know, their address is in the phone book. So they said they couldn't accept it.
Really?
I thought it was shocking. The local history society has been incredibly conservative. You know, they think that their best exhibit is a rowboat owned by the man who murdered Malakuta Kitty. They don't have anything in there about Malakuta Kitty, but they've got the rowboat of the man who murdered her. That's the best the Historical Society have been able to do until last week, when one of the members said, we've heard about that map, we'd like to display it in the museum. And I said, here's one already framed, was destined to go in the information centre. So I delivered that last night to them, but it hurts to think that the local council couldn't accept it. Why couldn't they accept it? I'll tell you why, because it took us 25 years to find out the site of where Uncle Max Harrison's family were massacred in 1870. 25 years of asking around the communities, and we had one non-Aboriginal fella who's a terrific man and very gentle, and he just kept on probing and probing and probing and probing until one old farmer got sick and tired of Lenny, mucking up his Sundays, and he didn't say anything, he just pointed to a spot on the map. And we went to that spot, and there they were.
Wow. I just grabbed that, Bruce. There's an invitation there, isn't there, I think, for anyone on council here from anywhere? Any politicians? Anyone know any politicians? I'm astonished. It's a question I hadn't even thought to ask. I just thought that would be something that you have been doing, but clearly not.
I talk to a lot of. I have been talking to permaculture groups and farmers groups for a decade or more. And farmers get a bad rap in this country, thanks to Barnaby. But mainly, farmers generally love their ground. Don't always like to tell you how they got the ground, but they do love the soil, they love the trees. And, some of the oldest farms that have been held in family hands for the longest are the ones that still have Aboriginal artefacts, still have Aboriginal marked trees. They're the ones I go to. And the history of those farms is horrible, but the family has kept the evidence, and for which we have to be grateful, even though the conversations are really, really difficult. But I look for the day when local shire councils, state government, federal government want to hear these stories.
The time of Indigenous occupation moving in Australia, it's kind of accepted generally that 65,000 years is it, and that kind of fits in with the narrative of moving out of Africa 70,000 years ago and taking 5,000 years to get here. But you've often said it's 120,000 years, and I was wondering if you could share with us why you say that.
Jim Bowler, who was involved with Mungo Man, Mungo Lady, who are back in the news again now because of a reburial that wasn't apparently with the agreement of some Aboriginal people in the district. That's a really sad case that it should happen like that. But Jim Bowler did a lot of the white scientific work at Lake Mungo, and most recently he did work at Point Pearce in Warrnambool and came up with a date of human occupation of 120,000 years. There are people who contest it, but they don't contest the science. The science is clear. It's been peer-reviewed, been cleared. Why is it contested? You can ask them, why do you contest this? And they'll say it's too different from the history. Isn't science science? It's not different. It's science. And it's really disappointing. And, I am being provocative. I keep on saying 120,000 years because I'm trying to get a reaction. I want people to start thinking about it. If it's, we know it's 65,000 years because the science at Mudjabibi has been accepted. That grinding dish is 65,000 years old, which I was telling the kids today. They were the humans who first learnt to grind grain into flour and made the first bread 45,000 years before Egyptians. This is a huge fact for Australia to learn and love, but the resistance to it is incredible. And so I keep on saying 120,000 years, even though there's a small active portion of the press that get very annoyed when I do so. They call themselves the Quiet Australians, noisiest bastards on earth, as far as I'm concerned. But you know, I think it's creeping in to the Australian psyche that this is a very old culture, and was very, very successful because no other culture has been able to sustain itself without going to war. And this, Charlie, you may not have been going to ask about war, but I think for a group of elders, however long ago it was, I don't know, to sit down and decide we're going to design the social map of this land, and we're going to have 400 separate nations, and each of those 400 separate nations will be responsible only for their portion of this land. They will be responsible to be in total contact with all others via that mesh of culture lines that go across the continent. And we know that operated really well, because when people in Western Australia sing about the whale, they sing it in Yuin language from the exact opposite side of the continent. Are they singing it in Yuin language, or is it sung in their language? Who cares? What it means is, when I go to Western Australia and hear that song, I understand it in my language. That means that there was total communication from east to west, north to south in this continent. It's a huge thing. But those people, with their genius of understanding how to manage humans, decided that everyone had their base, and they could travel other places, they could send stories, they could send trade goods to other places, but they could not take another person's land. Because they were humans, they were allowed to bash their wife was allowed to bash them, because, barangaroo. It's there, we have to talk about that too. They could wake up feeling jealous of their neighbour and react violently. They could be cruel, they could be kind, they could be loving, because they were human. Not because they were black, because we are human. And we are capable of all those things. But to manage it, to manage the human in a way where you eschewed war, is genius. Isolation probably helped a lot, because all that group of people over this massive continent could remain in contact and remain at peace by using symbologies, spiritual forms. But it might be good luck, partly good luck, but it's also genius. And we need to export that genius to Ukraine and to the Middle East. That ability to perceive the human without war, God, it's, pardon me, it's transferable into bullion. This should be Australia's great product to the world, and not in some corny way. We don't want, we don't want holy rollers making a cult out of this. It's not a cult. It's just a bit of human behaviour that is worth replicating. And I look at those old people, and I really shake my head at their ability to grasp the human condition. Because when I was at university, I studied history. They wouldn't let me study Australian history at Melbourne University because they didn't offer it as a subject, because nothing had happened in Australia worthy of history. That's what they told me. But I just think that this is something that the country can explore. We can explore it together, and we can enjoy each other's company while we do it. And I think we can solve a lot of human conditions, and at the same time as talking about sustainable farming, which was what we're supposed to be doing.
No, we don't know. That's just a little bit of it.
Because to grow perennials is a really important thing in Australia. I think the Mitchell grass as opposed to cotton is a really good argument to have, and I think Little Proud, who is now the leader of the National Party, is up for that conversation. I have a photograph of him with a copy of Dark Emu. He was unafraid to accept it, even though most of his party saw it as a poisonous Bible.
I think he was going to... He'd been invited along and too busy? Yeah. You grab that one. Thanks, Bruce. Just not a segue, but certainly a parallel. What you've just said just blows my mind on a number of levels. I'm currently reading a book called Song of Increase, and it's about bees and the unity of bees. And what you said about songlines and language being spoken from one side to the other, and the respect and the culture that's not based on war is nearly exactly the way the bees operate. And the songs they sing, the unity they have, they're only as strong as the unity of the hive, and their communication is with every other hive on the planet, basically. It's fascinating stuff. If you want to blow your mind about bees, and they're fascinating anyway, grab that. But that's just such a wonderful... And I was kind of struggling with, well, that's great for the bees, but, like, what is that? What can we learn from that? So just to hear that, what you just said, Bruce, gives me a lot of hope. It's the same, us as a culture, we have, Indigenous culture here in Australia has done that. And I dare say that it may have been the case. Do you think it's the case in North America, in other cultures? Do you think they had that connection and that kind of, it may be called something different? They might have had songlines but not called them songlines. Is that just an Indigenous framework?
I don't know. I talk to First Nation American people, First Nation Canadian people, First Nation Indian people a lot, and I really admire, First Nation Canadian American law, spirituality. It's wonderful, but it didn't come without war. Those people would fight each other. So when I was at university, I was taught that war is a natural condition of man. Pardon me. And they just ruined your recording, sorry.
I don't edit anything.
I'm from Victoria.
That's all right.
But what if it wasn't the natural condition of man? And they meant men. Pardon me.
There is hope, Bruce, and I'm pleased to hear it. Talking about, you were mentioning before, I guess they were, Dr. Ron's question about the 65,000 years versus 120. I mean, they were trying to discredit that. I mean, you unfortunately, people had tried to discredit you some years ago, and maybe still trying to have a crack. Without going into all the detail, what was their motivation? Was it a similar thing that there's this bloke who's come up with this book that was rewriting the history? Is that too hard for them to swallow? Was there some other agenda? Would they just had nothing better to do? What do you? I know that was a tough time. Do you have a sense of what that was, why they did that?
It was a tough time, and it's still tough. It's changed me, but it hasn't changed the history of the country. Oh, hang on. You have that one. Yeah, you have that one. I'll have this one. No,
this is lighter. No, that's actually... that'll do.
Both got a green light.
This smells bad. This
okay. No, it was a tough time, but it hasn't changed the history of the country. And I think there were agendas. I think there were plenty of people with vested interests who didn't want a different story about pardon me, of our history being told. The bloke who started the website against dark emu was a farm chemical distributor. Was there a vested interest? I don't know. I just find it disappointing that the only way to have a conversation is to attack, and to attack at every level, instead of having the beautiful conversation that we can have, where we can choose to disagree with each other. We can have different opinions, but we do it without raising our voice. That's what we need to do in this country. Look at the level of political debate in this country and in our sister America and in the UK. The level of debate is terrible. We should be ashamed to let our children listen to the news at that level of idiocy and selfishness and meanness. It's the meanness that surprises, the cruelty. So this is a conversation we've got to have. We've got to have a debate about 120,000 years. We've got to have a debate about perennial plants against annual plants. We've got to have all these debates. But if we can't convince each other, then let's not go to war. Let's continue talking and talking and talking and talking, because while you're talking, you're not shooting.
Bruce, do you think there's... we touched on government, politics and so on a bit. Do you think there's any point in going there with them? I mean, is time better spent just getting on with what you're doing with Black Duck Foods down there at Malakuta and just kind of getting on with it and not necessarily asking, not that you're asking for permission, but I mean, my sense is across the board, the only way that we get things done is just go and do it. And then the government will maybe catch up because they go, oh, hang on, that's popular, I'll go and I'll support that now. Is that kind of where we're at?
I think if you want to get things done, you just go and do them. But I met an Hawaiian woman in New Zealand years ago at a conference. I didn't meet her, I just saw her on the stage, and she said something that stopped me in my tracks. She said, we need to change our countries. She was talking about First Nations countries all around the Pacific. We need to change our countries. We need to get greater acceptance of our history. We need greater educational and health opportunities for our children. But in doing that, we must leave no one behind. It's easy to say that, leave no one behind, very hard to do it. It stopped me because I was a child of Whitlam years. I wasn't a child, but the crash through or crash mentality of Gough Whitlam seemed to be very successful. But then I heard that woman say, leave no one behind. You have to convince everyone. Otherwise, they are disaffected members of your community who will act as reactionaries behind you. Leave no one behind, she said. And so it takes time. But see, that's how I see Aboriginal culture, is that it took time. And it still happens today. You have a meeting, you can't make an agreement. And this is what one of those old people who helped me so many years ago in the 70s and 60s said, it's better not to make a decision than to make a bad one. So if you're in a meeting and you're having a disagreement, and I've seen this so often since then, where no agreement is made, and people get frustrated and say, we came here to make an agreement about this or that, but the wise old heads said, well, let's not make a bad decision, we'll come back another time. And what happens? Those people who disagreed with each other, they go home, they have a feed, they pat the dog, they do the vegetables, they go to sleep, they wake up, and they've changed their mind. So what they thought last night, they no longer think this morning. And so if you spend the time on negotiation, on human relationships, you might find that in 6 months or the next day or 2 years down the track that suddenly you agree. And I've seen it operate. It frustrates the hell out of government departments when it happens, because they've got a time agenda and they want to stick to it, they want to improve Aboriginal life, and then the community say, oh, we're not ready to make that decision yet. And but it works. You know, democracy, which Aboriginal people invented, is the slowest form of government on earth, and that's what makes it so beautiful.
Bruce, what are you usually, for those who aren't my Patreon members, is anyone listening to the Regenerative Journey podcast? Is anyone not listened to it? No. Oh, I can't believe it. Get out. I usually ask a set of questions after the interview, and for those who are Patreon members, you're probably wondering, where is this special bonus content you haven't been given yet? You'll get it So I usually ask these questions after the main interview, but I'm going to ask Bruce now, because you're all here, and it'd be rude if I left it out. But don't let that stop you from being a Patreon member and going on my website and forking out $10 a month. That's all it is, 2 crappy coffees, and you get a bit of a plug. Can I give a quick plug, Bruce?
Why not?
You get a video from me every week, which I should have done one today. I'm going to get in trouble, just ranting about whatever's going on in the world. A webinar once a month. You get a webinar with a guest. So I'm going to hit Bruce up at some point, if I can track you down at Malakuta there. A webinar, and you get transcripts of all the interviews and a whole lot of, some other stuff, which I can't talk about here in public. So, Bruce, one of the questions is, what are you irate about?
Sydney Swans.
Okay.
No, anger doesn't get us anywhere, you know. There's a lot of anger in the Aboriginal community. There's a lot of pain, you know, but it does get us nowhere. Anger, you know, might galvanise you into action, but often the action is not positive. You know, thought is much preferable to anger. If you're angry, think your way through it, because anger has been a horribly negative force in the world, and you don't want angry men deciding how the world runs, because they've had their chance, they've made a bloody mess of it, you know. Let's try and find a few calm women. I think Sydney did it last weekend.
What are you excited about, Bruce?
I'm bloody excited about a kunjim, which is a salad vegetable that grows in salt water, which is a brilliant flavour, and it's going to be so great for regenerative Australia, because on lands where the land has been spoilt by salt, this plant will grow, and it will help regenerate that soil. I'm also incredibly excited by vanilla lily, which is a translucent white vegetable that is snappy and so beautiful to taste. It is better than any vegetable I've ever eaten, and it is so prolific. It's a perennial plant, and what excites me is seeing the young Yuin people go up into the garden and lift a plant with the garden fork, not take it out of the ground, but just lift it up and harvest the tubers. And off one plant sometimes we get 30 tubers, and we leave 20 in there. That's incredibly exciting, because it's telling me that there's a food product here that Australia's going to love, and here's a plant that will produce it without water, without fertiliser. What is that going to mean for our continent? If we can grow food like that without using waters and fertiliser, in terms of the environment, in terms of sequestering carbon. It's brilliant, but the flavour is incredible. When we were cleaning Mitchell grass seed last week, the young fellas were dancing. They got such a buzz out of seeing that clean seed come through, and to taste it and to use it, because then we went and made bread from it. And it was so exciting. So, yeah, they're the things that excite me. Having my boat back in the water, my good friend, the boat that I had during the fires, she was all sorts of a mess, you know. I couldn't get it to start, you know, the seats were ruined. You know, she was just a mess anyway. I took it up to Eden and they fixed it for me, and I put it in the water on Saturday and it was just joyous. I could see the cormorants again, and the cormorants have a very bad press in the avian world. You know, they're not the greasy fish-smelling bird you think. They're highly intelligent and they're just beautiful company.
Shags get a bad rap too, don't they? That's a bird. For anyone who has a farm and has dams and fish in it, is a shag a cormorant?
A shag is a cormorant. There you go, you learned something already.
Bloody hell.
Don't know what you paid to get in tonight.
That's the bit of bonus content you get just for being here. I've got one more question. I've got two more questions, but I'm just going to, conscious of the time, couple more questions from the crowd. Ryan, where's the boss? Couple more, I reckon. Anyone bursting with questions? Oh, they're everywhere. There's that bloody hairy bloke up the back there.
Yeah, don't ask him.
Clarence here, brother. We're a First Nations business in regards to bush foods, and I guess going back to that question around councils, how do non-Aboriginal organisations, people, council government engage with Aboriginal organisations to make this change? Because I know I hear it myself, people asking how do we start, who do we contact, where are Aboriginal people to do this? So I think maybe to help on the better other question that came around council engagement, how do people engage with Aboriginal people to start this conversation, to make change in how we care for the country?
Can you repeat that, Bruce, for the listeners?
Yeah, how can Aboriginal people engage with local council and...
the other way around, how can non-Aboriginal start a conversation? Where to start?
If we're going to... if non-Aboriginal organisations like councils, etc., want to start a conversation with Aboriginal people, I would like to see us go right back so that those people are aware of the history of Australia, and so they're not turning up and saying in meetings, as I have heard countless times, what you people need to do is this. You know, we actually know what to do. We don't need to be told what to do. We need help to do it because we no longer have control of the land. We just need help to do it. And so I would like those organisations to know their history well. The hardest thing on earth for an Aboriginal person is every day of their life have to explain their Aboriginality, have to explain who they are, why they are. It's boring and it's perpetual. So it'd be really good if non-Aboriginal people turned up with some knowledge about the history of the country and the history of the community that they're in, and already have friendships in the Aboriginal community. People often ask me that question, what do I do now? And I say teapot. Fill your teapot with fresh leaves, put the boiling water on it, share it with an Aboriginal person. And because so many Aboriginal people have told me that when we've started this process in community, trying to bring non-Aboriginal organisations into the community, I've had so many Aboriginal particularly women, say, I've never had a white person in my house, and I was reluctant to do it this time, but you nagged me, you know. It's a good process. It's a healing process. It's excruciatingly embarrassing for two people who have no knowledge of each other to sit down and have that first cup of tea. But then suddenly you know the name of that lady's dog. She knows the name of your kids, and that's called a relationship. And without the relationship, there's no healing. There's no knowledge. It has to be a relationship. So it might sound like a pretty tepid way to start, but I think it's all about relationships. You know, in my district, local Aboriginal team wins 7 premierships in a row and gets shut out of the competition. Too good? Or was there a residual resentment? You know, so you can't have that relationship without knowing each other, and you can't solve difficulties in the relationship by banning things. You know, it has to be all up front, and it is really embarrassing. It's really hard work in the first instances, but after a couple of 100 years, you'll find it quite easy.
Any more?
Thank you, Maya. Just asking my question. My question was, how do we learn good manners?
How do we learn
Good manners.
with manners?
Good manners.
Oh, good manners. Sorry. How do we learn good manners?
I think good manners are innate. I think humans are good at good manners. They're also terrific at bad manners. We just have to choose. I think we know what to do. We know how to be kind and share. We just don't do it all the time. If we chose to do it, it would make a different world. I know it's not a satisfying answer, but it is the answer.
It kind of feels like it's not that difficult.
Yeah, look. Look at Costa up the back there. He wants to ask.
I can't even see him. I've got my specs on.
Look at him.
Has he got a question?
You can't see him. You're not looking.
Oh, there you go. I've got no spectacles. Yep, down here.
Bruce, whilst we're talking about this whole concept of conciliation and whatnot, what's your it's not about farming obviously, but what's your position on this cancel culture that's happening at the moment, where there's almost, like you said before, that you need to hear the story. For us to, by cancelling what happened, when we came to this country and whatnot, by cancelling that, is that stopping us from really being able to tell the story? What are your thoughts on the cancel culture of all of this?
I don't really understand what cancel culture is. Is it sort of denial sort of thing?
Well, I guess it's a sense of not necessarily denial, almost trying to eliminate what's happened by taking that certain statues and this and that, books and whatnot about things that happen. It's almost how would you describe it?
Erasing history.
It's erasing history, correct?
Well, I just had a thought. I mean, what happened 200 over the last 200 and so years? I don't think it was the original cancel culture, but thank you. That's just dawned on me that's like I've just heard that expression. What, I don't know, in the last 2 years.
You can't ignore it. You can't cancel it and just ignore that it didn't happen. You want to tell the story. The story has to be heard. Then that's part of the story.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I remember when they were starting to pull down statues in Australia or daub them in red paint, Matthew Flinders in the centre of Melbourne, and because I was in Melbourne on that occasion, the press asked me to talk about the statue that had been defaced, so-called defaced, and it really tests you because, one of the statues was John Batman, because John Batman is credited with discovering Melbourne, even though it was a fraud. the treaty that you signed with Aboriginal people was a fraud. But do we deface that statue of John Batman? And instead of cancelling it, I think we should replace it, or put another sculpture, another memento beside it. In Gippsland, it's said to be discovered by Angus Macmillan. Well, he wasn't even the first white man to ride through Gippsland. And when he did ride through Gippsland, he had an Aboriginal person who he was leading with a pistol to his forehead. That's how he discovered Gippsland. But there are monuments and plaques to Mitchell all through that country. And I drive past one in the middle of the night quite often, and the temptation to mutilate the plaque is huge. I've never done it because I'm such a good boy, but the temptation's there. But what I think we should do is to make sure there's another monument there which talks about the boy that survived the massacre on the Broadrib River, to tell the other side of that story, and to tell it with full heart, not with the kind of ambiguity that you read on a Macmillan plaque is kind of disgraceful. I mean, it's dog whistling, and we can do a lot better than that. So I don't believe in destroying anything. I don't think. I'm not a book burner. Even books like the one that argued against Dark Emu. Don't burn that book. Let's have the discussion about it, because the funny thing about that book was that it agrees with me so much. It relies on an argument about what's a farmer, what's a hunter-gatherer. And, in Dark Emu, I'm not really obsessed with hunters and gatherers. Great lifestyle if you can do it. But it's just that our people were not hunters and gatherers. We did hunt, we did gather, we still do it. That's why I'm so glad that the boat's in the water, because I'll go hunting as soon as I can. But the thing about it was that was a kind of a false argument. It was trying to cancel Dark Emu, and I just think we can have a better discussion. Instead of destroying the monument, put another one there. William Barrack was such a great man, and the Victorian government bought back one of his paintings from America the other day. And so that's adding. It's not cancelling anything, it's adding something back. William Cooper, Victorian Aboriginal man, during World War II, he walked on Parliament in Canberra, and he said the destruction of the Jews should not happen. An Aboriginal man walked on Canberra to tell our Parliament that Jewish people should not be slaughtered. Now, that was a radical view in Australia at that time. A radical view. And it was an Aboriginal man who objected, who stood up and objected. And if you go to Israel, there's a room dedicated to William Cooper. Aboriginal man, never went to school. That should shame Australia. There's no William Cooper room in Australia. There's one in Israel.
Let's do one more question. Did you have one, Costa? Did you put your hand up before? Two. No, might have bumped the thing. Two. Good.
Just continuing with that theme around identity. Like, names are so important, as you've been saying. They inform us of our identity, they inform our relationships, they connect us to place, they share story. Sort of been touching on that through these last few questions. I see uptake and connection happening at local levels with naming of places. I had an interesting experience when I was in transit the other day to learn about a major project here in Sydney, which most people would probably know is happening, a major railway, multi-billion dollars, and are we even open to the debate about the name of such a big piece of infrastructure? And did you know what it's being proposed to be called? Have you heard of that?
There's a major bit of infrastructure that's being constructed in Sydney, and the question is, do you know about that? And is there a whiff that it might be acknowledged or called an appropriate Indigenous name? No.
No, so this is a new rail line
Yep.
that goes from the new airport, proposed airport, to a suburb where they're going to change it. And it's already been, I mean, I know that some elders have been out there, but the decision been made, I believe, in Bradfield.
So what's it called?
Bradfield.
The Bradfield Expressway, or something. Railway. And there you go. Another. Well, we've got a lot of ground to make up, haven't we? But yeah. Another example.
We were talking about using Aboriginal names, Costa. Yeah, I think it's one of the great healing processes in Australia is to learn those names. About 6-7 years ago, I was listening to ABC broadcast of the Test cricket, and the two commentators, well-known people, were laughing about the Gabba, because it's called the Gabba after Woolloongabba, the Aboriginal name for it. And they were saying, and laughing up their sleeves, saying, where did you get a name like that from? How stupid. Why don't we call it the Oval or something, And I thought, those two men just passed up the greatest opportunity to talk about Australian history, and they didn't even know it. They didn't know where the name Woolloongabba came from, or if they did, they were pretending not to know it. And it was a really lost opportunity, and we can have these opportunities every day. I'm on the board of First Languages in Australia, and I've been on it for 20 years, and I have been trying all those 20 years to get the tourism department in Australia, state and federal, local council, state governments, federal governments, to look at a process of renaming everything and not getting rid of one name, not cancelling names, but adding other names, dual naming of places. And I'd like to see it where the community are engaged and employed to provide that name and to provide the authenticity of the name and the story behind the name and the meaning of the name, because these things are so important for our country's psyche. So we don't want to go back and arguing and, giggling about the name Woolloongabba. We should be saying it with pride. But 230 years later, not to know what that means, really shows how tenuous the grip of non-Indigenous Australia is to this land. The Geelong footy ground used to be called Cardinia Park, and now it's called Brain Fade Australia or something, I don't know. It's named
sponsor's name.
Sponsor's name. And it's had about 8 sponsors' names. Yeah. I can't keep up with them because, there's a 3-year cycle in sponsorships, and it's called something different every year, Skills Stadium or something. It's ridiculous. They had this perfect name, Cardinia Park, And Cardinia is a Wathaurong word, and it means the rays of the early morning sun. What sporting ground in the world has such a gracious name? You know, White City, Kooyong means eel. You know, we had one. And we got rid of Kooyong and we got rid of Cardinia. We had it there. And, you know, a smart tourist marketer could drag a jet line a week to Australia with people who wanted to go to Cardinia Park, who wanted to go to Kooyong. You know, smart business persons could do that. But all these decisions are going to come, and there are going to be smart business people involved in them. But when will they ask themselves, how can Aboriginal people benefit from this? There has to be a structure so that when Aboriginal culture is used, Aboriginal people benefit. It's not rocket science, it can be done easily. You have to do it when you use certain words in your company's logo. You know, you can't use, John Deere tractors willy-nilly, you have to pay for it. And when people use Aboriginal culture and words, they should expect to pay for it. And it'll be so exciting for the country when we adopt that way of thinking about our country and taking pride in it. You know, jumping on, a train in New York and someone laughing at your accent and you say, but why don't you come down to Cardinia Park and watch a game of AFL? You'll be so excited because the Yanks actually love AFL. I'm in Sydney. But these opportunities are there for us. They can be really healing, and there'll be money made from all of them, but how can Aboriginal people and communities benefit from it? It's a disgrace to see what's happened to the macadamia nut and to Kakadu plum, and how Aboriginal people have been excluded from the benefit. We can do so much better than that. And we can do, and it's a healing process for us. It's palpable, it's there. We can grab hold of it and say, this is what we're going to do. And when Albanese said we're going to adopt the statement from the heart in full, it was transformative. It's easy, we can do it. But so far we've chosen not to do it.
I mean, it's a great opportunity, great example of an opportunity that is staring someone in the face, government, state, federal, I don't know. But, it kind of reeks of, I don't know, there's opportunity, but no one's picking that up. So is it all a bit sort of shallow, a lot of these? The discussions around conciliation, or still the old word reconciliation. I've got one last question. I got one there.
Little present perhaps back to Bruce and some views. I was in Rome just last week and got back on Saturday, and last Wednesday I was able to present with a colleague from your country the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Pope Francis. So that went into the Australian paper today, and it is amazing what's happening with the spirit of this statement, that it's reaching leaders in lots of places and the momentum is clearly there. So that's just a little hat to you. Thanks, Bruce.
Wow.
And thank you very much for doing that. He looks very happy in that photo to have received the Uluru Statement, whereas Malcolm Turnbull, when it was delivered to him, knocked it back before lunchtime. So perhaps if we could get the Pope in the new cabinet.
We'll get the Pope down here naming infrastructure. One last question, Bruce. It's the one I finished my interviews with. For those who are Patreon members, you'll know exactly what question I'm about to ask Bruce. Bruce, we're driving along. Is there a big road down at Malakuta? Or is it highway? It's just imagine you're on the closest highway.
Princess Highway.
You're on the Princess Highway burning along below the speed limit, and there's a billboard on the side of the road and it's blank. And everyone who goes past it can see a statement, a word, a question, a phrase that you are allowed to put on there. You can have both sides, okay, the oncoming and, north, south, east, west, whatever. What would you put on there?
Through the mother. When in my community, when we begin or finish a statement or a sentence, we say through the mother, because we recognise that we've all come through the mother, and the earth being our mother, we will go back to the mother. So as soon as you start thinking about the earth as your mother, if you respect your mother, you will not hurt her. You will do anything you can for her comfort and for her recognition. And so I'd put that through the mother. We come through the mother's heartbeat.
Do you want something on the other side?
Go Tigers.
Bruce, I can't tell you what a wonderful evening I've had. I know there's probably lots of sore bums out there. But that was fascinating. I had no idea that we were going to cover so much ground and weave so many wonderful things into that conversation. I kind of wasn't surprised because we've had a chat before and I've listened to you many a time. But I've got to say what an honour it is to be here with you again, and I hope it's not the last time. I'd love to get down to the farm at Malakuta. I'd love you to start working with council and government, and there's lots of things I think that this world needs from you, hope to not too much, no pressure, Bruce. Can I thank you all for being here tonight, because you didn't have to be here. You could have been at home cooking, sleeping, being on a Zoom with someone or something. And I really appreciate the fact that we've got a hall here full of sore bums, but hopefully, minds that are a little more not so much open, but just willing to help, and help heal. And Tim, thank you for the facilities as well. Really appreciate that. And Ryan for organising this, which, I don't know, we'll have a chat. Maybe we'll do this more often. I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the fact is, what I love about it is we're in Sydney. We're in an urban area. We're in a suburb, and we're full, and you're full. The room is full, and you're full now. Listening in this case to Uncle Bruce. So thank you for your time, Bruce. Thank you. And this episode is going to be the fastest turnaround we've ever done. It'll be out next Tuesday. Da-na-na-na. So enjoy yourselves. I don't know what Bruce is up to. He might be just bolting out of here. I've got to go and drain the spuds because I'm about to blow a gasket. But I'll be back to have a chat. And Ryan, over to you, mate. Thank you so much.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.